Bánh Xèo means sizzling crepe. And before we can get sizzling, I need rice flour, I need fish sauce, and turmeric. All very important ingredients. And we're gonna use 2 of these right now to make the actual crepe batter, starting with this rice flour. All this is if you took jasmine rice or white rice and ground it down into a very, very fine flour. So when you're making a batter, it makes a very, very crispy batter. Next, I am gonna use some all-purpose flour. To give it really great color, we're using turmeric. It's considered one of the world's superfoods, but when you dry it and powderize it, it creates this gorgeous kind of mustardy saffron color. Next, a little bit of cornstarch. So this crepe is gonna be nice and kind of spongy, but also crispy on the edges. Little bit of kosher salt. And these are my dries, and I like to get them all together before we start adding the liquids. Okay, so the wets, very simple. Good amount of coconut milk. And then finally, to give some bubbles and some flavor, I'm just putting a beer in there. Don't do that at home. That's a trained professional move. Look how beautiful that batter is. That is so gorgeous. Working this together until I get something thinner than an American pancake batter, but thicker than a French crepe batter. All right, because the flour molecules have to hydrate, I'm gonna set this aside for 15 to 30 minutes. So one of the hallmarks of Bánh Xèo is the crepe must have pork in it, and if you're feeling really lucky, a little bit of shrimp in it too. Pork belly traditionally is a really tough cut of pork. I'm gonna show you a great way to make this pork very tender very quickly. I like to buy it with the skin off because I can tenderize this pork belly, but the skin is so tough that even with my baking soda trick and boiling, the skin's still gonna be a little tough. So make sure to grab that pork belly that has no skin. So the pork belly sliced, I take some water, I bring it up to a boil, and I'm just gonna add baking soda. Baking soda coats this pork. It doesn't allow the muscle fibers to bond together, right? It actually keeps them apart. I'm gonna let this pork boil for about 10 to 15 minutes. All right, so I'm gonna show you how to make nuoc chum. It is that beautifully sweet and tangy, spicy dipping sauce that's used for just about all Vietnamese dishes, like egg rolls, spring rolls, and it's really, really simple to make. So let me do the liquid portion first. I'm gonna whisk together sugar, lime juice, water, rice vinegar. So I'm just building that 5 flavor, hot, sour, salty, sweet, savory type of flavor profile. Vietnamese fish sauce. So this sauce is called nuoc chum. Fish sauce by itself is called nuoc mam. I think it's always fun to learn all the terms in the language of the cuisine you're cooking. And now we're gonna add chilies and garlic to actually pop this nuoc chum even more. For garlic, I'm just laying my knife flat, pounding it flat, both cloves, and I'm just giving it a nice tight mince. Thai chilies or bird's eye chilies, I've got 1 to 2 are gonna be plenty hot, so you will be tasting and feeling the spice on this chili. So I'm just gonna float that right into there as well. And then I like to kind of add a little bit of mouth feel, some texture, and I'm gonna be doing carrots and daikon radish. And the way I like to julienne is to square off the carrot on 2 sides. I don't really need to peel it. And then I'm just gonna slice very thin tiles, like 1/8 to 1/4 inch tiles, and then lay those on top of each other, slice very thin juliennes. So a little bit of the carrots in there. And then daikon, same thing. Daikon is a big, long radish. I'm just gonna take about a 2-inch section and then find my nice thin tiles. Nice thin slices now. All right, let's stir this together, take a taste. It's got a really nice sweetness to it. It's backed up by a good amount of salt. And just that kind of earthiness of the garlic is awesome. And I like to cut scallions in half, line up those halves, and I'm just gonna do straight sliced scallions. Let's put that on the plate. This is how I like to cut an onion. I square off the top, and I just cut the root end off the bottom. I go North Pole to South Pole, and that's when I peel. All right, so these onions are gonna sit in the pan and be totally enveloped by the crepe. I could either do slices, like so, which are gonna kind of mellow and sit in the pan and get nice and sweet. Or if you want as well, you could do what I like to call the lyonnaise, which is cutting along the ribs, always facing the center of the onion. So that'll go into there. All right, I'm gonna pull the pork out of the bath. The crepe batter is rested. I've got all my mise en place. This is my pan of choice. It's an 8 to 9 inch coated or non-stick pan, and that's gonna really help keep that crepe from sticking, but still create a crunchy crepe. Checking my consistency, yes, that looks really good. Not too thick, not too thin. And I'm gonna add some scallions into there now. So a word about shrimp. These crepes have pork and shrimp suspended in them. I'm using a smaller shrimp today. So if you're using a really large shrimp, like a 21, 25 or jumbo, split them in half lengthwise so they don't crack up your crepe when you go to fold them. All right, let's fire this. So first thing I'm gonna do is get a decent amount of oil. All right, so I'm gonna start with a few pieces of pork belly. And again, I don't need a lot because I'm gonna make a bunch of crepes with this recipe. A good amount of onion. And since the pork is already pre-cooked, I can go ahead and add my shrimp. If you're starting with raw, then let that pork kind of catch up before you add your shrimp, because you want all the proteins to kind of be at that same place in cook. So I'm gonna let my onions brown up just a little bit for that maximum sweetness. Going in with my batter, I'm gonna grab all those ingredients in my batter and suspend them. So I've got the batter in, and now I'm gonna tilt. And just like making an omelet, guys, you wanna spread this batter out so you get maximum coverage on the pan, but also make sure that you're spread out enough so you have a nice even layer all the way through. So this is when I'm gonna lower the heat a bit. So as you can see, I've got perfect spread. The bottom is starting to brown slightly, but still can lift off. That is the point where now we need to add the bean sprouts and cook the top. And the way we're gonna do that is, I like to add the bean sprouts in kind of on one side because I'm gonna be folding this in half. And then we're gonna put a lid on it, and that steam, as you can see, is gonna get captured and now steam the top. You hear that? That's the sao, guys. Sao in bánh xèo is Vietnamese for that. Shh. So let this sao for a minute. To eat this, we've got a Vietnamese greens plate, we've got the nuoc cham, and we've got some rice papers, all right? The practice of wrapping food in parcels of either vegetables or rice paper is a real indigenous Vietnamese practice. Vietnam was ruled by China for 1,000 years and then French influence for a while, but this beautiful method of wrapping things in herbs predates all that. So my basic greens plate is this: green leaf lettuce, mint is easy to find, cilantro is easy to find. I'm using perilla here that kind of has that Japanese shiso flavor, and then I'm using a little bit of cucumber. How you do it is up to you, but I want you to have at least 2 or 3 of these. And then I'm gonna show you how to eat this with rice paper after I'm done. Speaking of, I think it's time to plate our bánh xèo. Visually what I'm looking for, the bean sprouts have wilted a bit, the crepe is solid but still sliding, and I'm looking for a nice GBD, a golden brown and delicious. So now I'm going to bring the bánh xèo here. So what I do is I like to slide it halfway off and then fold it right over. Just like that. A few ways you can present it. You could either send it thusly on a plate, but if you want to decorate and put the greens plate next to it, I think it's a really nice touch. In Vietnam on the streets, you really see these bánh xèo vendors having like 10, 12 pans all going at the same time. It's pretty amazing. Certain parts of Vietnam eat it with a rice paper, but it's totally up to you. You could just use veggies. But I soak the rice papers in warm water until I feel them just start folding over on themselves. I'll drain and let them carry over on my cutting board. That means I'm gonna let them finish hydrating here. And after about 10 seconds, you're gonna see they're gonna be nice, perfectly sticky, and ready to eat. Check it out. It's gotten nice, soft, tender, and chewy. I usually will take a piece of rice paper, a nice section of the bánh xèo right there, ready to go. I'm gonna crack off a little bit of the greens. I'm gonna lay the bánh xèo right in the middle there. Fold that over into a nice little package. I'll take the nuoc cham, and if you have your own nuoc cham, you could do the dip, but if you don't want to cross-contaminate, just do a nice little drizzle. Cheers, everybody. The savoriness of the pork and the shrimp married with the crispiness and the cooling of the bean sprouts. And then you've got the herbs, then you've got the crispiness, and then the nuoc cham. This really is an outstanding Vietnamese experience. Today I'm making a classic comfort dish, sweet and sour pork. Sweet and sour pork is widely known as a Chinese American classic, but did you know it actually has roots from Western China? That sweet and sour, what we call Sun Team, is very Chinese. Hey team, I'm Jet Tila and welcome to Ready Jet Cook, where I teach you how to make my favorite Asian dishes from pantry to plate. But before we get started, please take a minute to subscribe to the Food Network YouTube channel. I remember eating this dish as a kid on the bus ride to Chinatown hanging out with my grandmother. So let's start picking out some ingredients while I tell you a little bit more about where these flavors originated. All right, so I'm gonna need some pineapple chunks, ketchup, and Worcestershire sauce. This is one of those food anthropology moments where it all connects and it makes your head hurt because it's sweet and sour, and there's multiple sweet and sour things like sugar, and then I've got kind of the sweetness from the pineapple, but then I've got sour from vinegar, just plain old vinegar, and also I've got the acid from the Worcestershire sauce. I'm gonna get all the basic ingredients done first. Yes, I'm gonna add a little food coloring. You can at me if you want, and if you don't wanna use it, don't worry about it. Worcestershire sauce is fermented tamarind, which is sour, but back in the day, the older formulation also had fish. Worcestershire sauce was a fermented fish sauce. Chinese ketchup was fermented fish sauce. And now we're calling this stuff ketchup. Anyway, I've either bored you or I've interested you to make this dish with me. So Chinese ketchup is supposedly the inspiration to like the modern ketchup. So instead of a fish sauce, now it's a tomato-based sauce. So now it's time for pineapple. And no, I'm not copping out using canned pineapple. I think that it's got a really nice flavor. And I also need this pineapple because I need the juice as well. So I'm going to go ahead and separate the juice and the fruit. So I'm using pineapples in juice. If you end up using pineapples in syrup, that's fine too. Just back off the sugar in the sauce and you're good to go. I'm going to make a cornstarch slurry. So that just means a tablespoon of water and a tablespoon of cornstarch. And that slurry needs to be combined here in this bowl before it's added to the sauce. And then finally, the star of this flavor show is going to be a little bit of that canned pineapple juice. That's it. That is magic liquid. That is the elixir that's gonna be our sweet and sour pork sauce. So the sauce is done. Let me show you some really cool tricks when it comes to frying up the pork part. All right, so we need to spend a little bit of time on pork. We really want to show you how most Chinese restaurants marinate pork, actually all their meats, to make them super tender. I think this step is super crucial to getting that really nice mouthfeel because I want a crunchy nugget on the outside because of the batter, but I want a really tender bite of pork on the inside. And this is how to do it. So what I'm going to do is cut my pork into 1.5-inch cubes. And usually when you cube out meat, it's gonna leave it a little tough. So the secret is marinating, also known as velveting. So you might see this kind of marination technique written out in recipes as velveting, but it's very simple. So obviously pieces of pork are not gonna be perfect 1.5-inch cubes, but you know what? You're gonna approximate, and as long as they're evenly cut, they're gonna cook evenly. So my tip is always cut it into strips of 1.5, and then those 1.5-inch strips become 1.5-inch cubes. Pork into a bowl, and the marination ingredients are very simple. So remember, baking soda is the tenderizer, okay? Cornstarch helps pull the marination into the pork. Salt is for flavor. That's it. And I want to use a little bit of water just to kind of break down and move all of those flours together. So let me show you what I'm talking about. Baking soda actually gets into the muscle fibers and almost pushes it apart, right? And make it really tender. I'm gonna put this to the side, wash hands, and come back and fry it up. Okay, so I need to give you a definitive recipe for for what we call tempura flour. A lot of you have cooked with me before, and I'm calling for tempura flour anywhere I am frying something to make a crispy batter. All right, this is gonna be the dredge and the batter mix for anything you need crispy. It's very simple. AP flour, cornstarch, and baking soda. Yes, that's it. I'm whisking this together to aerate it. You can actually run it through a sieve if you want, but we've made frying flour. Magic tempura flour does everything. I'm gonna add a little bit to the pork, and I'm gonna actually start by the dredging of it. And all that means is I'm covering all the surface area of the pork with this flour. And now by adding a bit of water, I'm making the batter simultaneously. And it's not a heavy batter, so you don't need to go big with the water. But I'm kind of adding water to try to get something that's kind of close to a thin crepe batter. There it goes. You can kind of start to see it getting really silky and super smooth, almost like a slurry. There it is. So I'm gonna show you what I'm looking for here. So each piece is coated. It's got a really nice thick covering of this frying flour batter. All right, so I'm gonna fry right around 350 to 360, knowing I'm gonna lose a little temp, and make sure to throw them in one by one. The batter is gonna make the pork kind of stick together, so make sure you're pulling them apart before you get them into the oil. And once they're in, you wanna make sure they don't stick together. So I'm just getting in and making sure they stay apart. And you're always gonna wanna drain on a rack. The rack is gonna keep the pork suspended. It's gonna make sure it doesn't get oil logged and sog out. And I've also started an oven on low at about 200 degrees to keep the pork as I'm gonna be cutting my vegetables before I actually get it into that final pan. What I'm listening for is a constant searing or frying sound. I'm looking for the bubbles to be small, tight, and consistent. If you start to see the bubbles slow down a little bit, that means the oil's getting too cold. So just wait. This is a large 7 to 8 quart pot. If you don't have one this big, just do this in 2 or 3 batches to make sure you're keeping that oil nice and hot. So all I'm really looking for is GBD, golden brown and delicious. Because if my oil is consistent at 350 or 360, the pork's gonna be cooked through on the inside when the outside is nice and golden brown. All right, so some of our first pieces are done, and I'm really just going by color. I know that these guys have been in there probably 6 minutes. With such a small cube, they're definitely cooked through. All righty, make sure they're spaced out. You don't wanna crowd them because you don't wanna create steam and lose that crunchiness. So they are done. It's time to grab our veggies and our pan and finish this sweet and sour. Because it's not like a hardcore stir fry, I don't need 10,000 BTUs here. I'm just gonna put this pan over medium as I'm cutting my vegetables and tossing as I go. So the first thing I'm gonna need is garlic. Cut the backs, smash them flat, and I'm just gonna give them a nice little mince. I'm gonna add just a little bit of that neutral oil. Grapeseed, avocado, get as fancy as you want. Next, half an onion. Top, tail, large dice. Once that's peeled, so come in 3/4 inch towards the root, 3/4 inch dices, perfect. Now, bell peppers, top, tail, seed pod out. I'm gonna cut these into dice all together. Just remember, tile becomes a slice, slice becomes a dice. Tile, dice. I'm using scallions like veggies here, meaning I want them larger. So just a biased 1 inch. I'm not using them for garnish. So by the time I've got my scallions in, the bell peppers and the onions are perfect. I'm gonna add pineapple. And like the orange chicken you've made with me, I'm making the sauce into a slurry first because I want this sauce thick before the pork hits it to keep that pork nugget super crispy. This is where you crank your heat to the max, and you want to continue to stir to make sure to activate that cornstarch slurry. And that slurry needs to be about 150 and 80 degrees, right under boiling point, to activate. And you're not gonna add the pork until you have a really nice thick slurry. And that's how you get that lovely kind of like candy-like coating, and the pork still stays crispy. So as you can see around the edges, I'm starting to get 200-degree simmering. The smell is incredible. That vinegar, that sugar, all of these vegetables. I'm looking for that, what we call in French, nappe, meaning I'm gonna run the wood spoon through the sauce. I'm gonna run a channel, and if that channel doesn't run across the spoon, that's the consistency. That's that perfect coating and not sogging consistency. All right, so I have even bubbles across the top. I'm gonna grab the pork out of the oven and put it right into the pan. So the slurry is activated. It's time to get that pork coverage. So now, if you're comfortable, you toss it together. So the pork, vegetables, and pineapple are perfectly coated. It is time to plate. So I always serve sweet and sour with some kind of starch. Because of all that acid and sugar, they're delicious, but just a little bit of rice or noodles to mellow it out really is that perfect accompaniment. Here we go. A little pork, a little pineapple, a little prayer that I don't burn my mouth, and this is it. Just that dance, that balance between acid and sweet and salty and umami is so perfect. Sweet and sour pork never disappoints. You can see why it's been such a classic for a long time. I'm about to teach you how to make Dan Dan noodles that originate from the Sichuan province in China. The sauce uses tahini, which you probably know from making hummus, but it also uses other umami-packed ingredients that make these noodles irresistible. Let's get into it. All right, Dan Dan time. Let's do that first. You can't have Szechuan food without Szechuan peppercorns. They kind of look like red peppercorns visually, but once you grind them down into a powder, they have a very unique flavor. They're kind of hot like peppercorns. They're aromatic, they're floral, they're spicy, but they also have this very lemony flavor like sumac. And then they create this fun, tingly sensation, almost a numbing spice. So if you go to the Szechuan restaurant, you see that ma la word, it means hot and numbing. Next, we have preserved vegetables. You're like, well, what kind of vegetables? So this cool earthen jar is Tianjin preserved vegetables. In the north of China, you can't get fresh vegetables all year long, so they take these cabbages, they cut them, salt them, and then ferment them, and they hold them in these earthen jars, and that fermentation creates umami, or savoriness, that gives these Szechuan dishes a huge pop. All right, thin soy and sweet soy. The world of soy sauce is vast. I think the best note I can give you is match the country of origin that you're cooking. So I'm making Chinese Dan Dan noodles, I'm gonna pull Chinese soy sauce. These are the two primaries. Thin soy is Chinese all-purpose soy sauce. You might also see it labeled as light soy. They're the same thing. Next, sweet soy sauce. That's basically molasses added to Chinese soy sauce, so it coats well, gives you a nice sweet pop, and together these are gonna make delicious Dan Dan noodles. All right, pantry's done. This is a really fast dish, but it has some critical steps that we need to cover. Like always, we're gonna get the knife work out of the way, then we're gonna boil the pasta, and then concurrently make that really savory meat sauce, and then we're gonna tie it all together. Very classic Chinese ingredients here. Ginger, garlic, and scallions. If you went to that specific culinary school with the 3-letter acronyms, they call it GGS. Y'all know what I'm talking about if you went there. So with ginger, I basically break off the little fingers, end up with the big main stalk, and we're gonna do a quick knife peel. And the way I like to do that is to square one side off so it sits up straight. And I'm just gonna run the blade of my knife along the body of the ginger until I rub off the ginger skin from one side. And then I'm gonna do the same thing to the other. If this makes you nervous, just use a peeler or a spoon, whatever makes you most comfortable. I like to use the knife because I'm gonna use the knife anyway for slicing, and I think it's just more efficient that way. So now that you have the ginger peeled, I'm gonna cut one end off so it sits up straight, just like that. And then I'm gonna cut 1/8" tiles and then lay those tiles on top of each other and then come down with 1/8" slices. My grandma always called this the blades of grass cut. So there it is, ginger blades of grass. Moving on with garlic. Anytime I'm adding garlic to a wok or a fry pan, I smash it flat and you just give it kind of a rough mince. So flat garlic, join it together, and just a nice 1/4 inch slicing pass. Give that a 1/4 turn, and then another 1/4 inch slicing pass. So the Szechuan province grows really amazing chilies and garlic, so I'm not gonna be shy here because this is really gonna pop the flavor of the Dan Dan noodles. Lastly, I've got some scallions. I like to line up the roots, take off those root pieces, and what I'll do is cut them in half, line them all up, and efficiently just slice all the scallions together. So let's spend a little time with these preserved vegetables. So this is basically cabbage that has been salted and allowed to ferment in earthen jars like this. That fermentation does a few things. A, it preserves these vegetables, but B, it releases so much umami flavor. The issue is salt, because they've packed them in salt. We want to get to the umami and the deliciousness, we gotta rinse the salt out of them. So I like to put it in a bowl. I'm gonna add water in here and just give it a couple water changes and squeeze out the excess, and that's the way to prep these preserved vegetables. So water into the bowl. I'm gonna kind of wash it like I'm washing rice, and then I'm gonna pour out the excess and give it a really good squeeze to get it as dry as possible, because I want the umami flavor, I want the depth of these, but I want to rinse off the salt. There it is, that's what I'm talking about right there. So the veggies are done, let's build the Dan Dan sauce. From the pantry is sweet soy sauce, light soy sauce, sambal or chili garlic sauce. And with the sambal, if you love spicy, you could go a little heavier. Black vinegar. The tahini is actually my addition to this dish, because in China you would use ground sesame seeds, which all tahini is ground sesame. So I think you get better flavor and a better viscosity using tahini. And then finally, we took those Szechuan peppercorns, we ran them in a little spice grinder, and that's how you get this beautiful powder. So with all the ingredients in, I'm just gonna whisk this until it comes together. With any of the dishes that we've cooked together, if you find a stir fry that you fall in love with, just take the sauce recipe and multiply it up 2 to 10 times, put it in a container, label it, and you've got stir fry sauce at your disposal. With all my prep done, it's time to get cooking. So I preheated this wok for about 1 to 2 minutes until it gets nice and hot. If you don't have a wok, don't worry about it. A nice heavy skillet, like a enamelized cast iron pan or any pan that has wide sides that gets very hot is gonna do fine. So I'm always starting out with a high temperature, low flavor oil, peanut, canola, grapeseed work. Anytime I have ginger and garlic in a stir fry, they're gonna go in first. I always wanna fry up my ginger and garlic because that's gonna help perfume the oil and get the pan ready for the ground pork. This recipe is very similar to a pasta and meat sauce, right? We're gonna cook this meat sauce with all these aromatics and liquids, and what's gonna happen is we're gonna cook our noodles, and then we're gonna bring it together in the bowl. And you can see the ginger and the garlic and the ground pork marrying together, and I'm gonna brown that very well to really release flavor out of here. With the pork halfway, I'm gonna add these preserved vegetables because I do wanna saute them into that hot oil. I know I'm about 5 to 8 minutes away from the meat sauce. I'm gonna drop the noodles now so they meet up at that perfect time when the noodles are nice and still starchy, and it'll suck up the sauce. As for the noodles, these are just simply Chinese wheat noodles. If you can't get the Chinese noodles, use pasta. I think linguine or spaghetti or angel hair, any of those would work deliciously in this dish. I really wanted to show you how to make Dan Dan noodles because I really think they're the next big noodle dish. I mean, if we look at the evolution of noodle dishes, I would say lo mein, and then pad thai, and then pad thai became khao soi, and then I think Dan Dan are the noodles that are gonna kind of be all the rage. So I really wanted to make sure to cook this with you. And just like our European counterparts, deglazing with wine is something that's been done in China forever. In China, I would use a Shaoxing or a rice wine. I'm simply using a little sherry to deglaze this meat sauce. As the sherry deglazes, it's the perfect time to add the spinach to get wilting. Once the sherry has deglazed, meaning it's actually evaporated almost 100%, I'm gonna add the sauce that we made. I'm gonna let this sauce bubble up a little bit. All those flavors in the pan are gonna marry together. Right before you plate up is your last chance to kind of check your flavors and adjust them before you actually get them to the plate to your guest. It's rich, it's spicy, it's savory, and I always want my Dan Dan sauce on the stronger side because you're putting it right onto just plain pasta. I want my noodles just al dente. I don't want them too far cooked. And I'm just gonna drain them. No need to rinse them. Just like the Italian pasta rules, you don't wanna rinse your noodles because you want all that delicious starch to work together and suck up that sauce. We'll just give that a quick toss to get the residual moisture out. I'm gonna bring my plate over. I wanna get a portion of my noodles into the bowl. And you can do this either individual or just a giant family platter. Either one will work. Then I'm gonna come over the top and smother these noodles with my Dan Dan sauce. Scallions are the perfect garnish. Tiny bit of the Szechuan peppercorn. Little pepper, it's also really nice. And there it is, guys. You know, the Italian culture and the Chinese culture, not that different. Noodles and meat sauce, but the Szechuan version is gonna be a lot spicier and a lot tangier. Let me give that a shot there. It's that tangy craveability that pops. But what's fun is that little numbing spice of the Szechuan peppercorn. Well, there you have it, family. We made Dan Dan noodles together. I'm making a classic Japanese miso ramen with Char Siu pork belly. Now, the Chinese may have invented ramen originally, but over the past century, the Japanese have taken the dish, perfected it, and really popularized it around the world. Now it's time for me to show you how to make it in your kitchen. What's happening, guys? I am Jet Tila, and this is Ready Jet Cook, where I show you how to make some of my favorite Asian dishes from pantry to plate. Let's get cooking. All right, miso ramen. So I'm gonna talk about miso and pork belly when we get into the kitchen, but we gotta spend some time on kombu. So this is a giant kelp leaf, grows in the ocean. You take it and you dry it, and it becomes this. That drying process creates this natural sea salt. It's been done this way by fishermen for 1,000 years. The amazing flavor this gives is actually what MSG was synthesized to actually taste like. But this is savory in its most natural form. We are using kombu for the savory profile, and it really is the essence of umami. The word umami literally translates to the spirit of flavor. That's how important it is, and that's what kombu is gonna give us. I'll show you how to use it in the kitchen. Pork belly, miso. So for the miso ramen, I need pork belly. Make sure to get skinless pork belly because those skins will not break down in time. It'll be chewy like rubber bands. And also, I'm using red miso, also known as aka miso. There's 3 levels of fermentation: white, yellow, red. Basically, the more fermented, the more pungent, the more salty. I'm going with red because it has the most flavor, the most punch, and I think it's super delicious. So, lots to do, but we're gonna make it very simple. There are 4 very popular styles of ramen, and they're basically classified by their broths. So first, we're gonna be making miso ramen today, which uses miso as the primary ingredient and flavoring. The second would be shio, which is the Japanese word for salt. So salt basically flavors the broth, which obviously has bones in it. And then there's shoyu, which is the Japanese word for soy sauce. So you have a dark soy sauce broth. And then there's tonkotsu broth, which is a very fatty bone broth. All very popular. Today we're gonna be making a miso broth, and we're actually gonna start with a soy sauce marinade to cook the char siu, which is the pork belly, which is the same marinade which we're gonna marinate those eggs. I'm gonna teach you how to make those really cool ramen eggs that are just soft in the middle and coated with soy sauce. So in a cold saucepan, we are going to start with sake. And you know, a lot of Japanese chefs work in formulas, right? Meaning I'm gonna go about 2 parts sake to 1 part soy, which makes it really easy to kind of think about measuring, and then the rest will be sugar because I want a balance of flavors. We've got the flavorings, and now we're gonna need the aromatics. So the aromatics for this soy broth is going to be ginger. And whenever you're cutting ginger for a marinade or a quick broth, we don't really have to worry about, you know, perfect cuts. We just want to expose as much surface area as possible. And with scallions, I'm just gonna chop these in half because we're gonna end up removing these later. Ginger, scallions, and then finally a little water to dilute and give me more base for the bellies and the eggs. So we're gonna get the soy broth overheat. We wanna dissolve that sugar, and then we're gonna divide it in half. Half this broth is going to be for the pork, and the other half is gonna marinate the eggs. And I'm gonna show you how to make those really cool ramen eggs that you see. It's a very fun little tip. What I'm gonna do is insert a little pin inside the bottom part of the egg. And when I mean bottom, the wide side, because an egg kind of tapers into kind of like a point. We want that bottom side. And all I'm gonna do is take a little pin to the top of that and then poke a little hole. There's a natural little air pocket in there. And what I'm gonna do is relieve the pressure from that air pocket. And also this allows the hot water to get in there to help kind of poach that egg out. So that's all we're doing. We're gonna do that to every single egg, and you won't lose any egg that way. That's gonna get the hot water in there and allow you to make a perfectly boiled 6-minute egg. Once I poke the air hole in, I'm just going to lower the eggs into boiling water for 6 minutes. That's gonna give you that soft yolk in the middle without the yolk setting up. And I'm actually dropping these eggs right in from the refrigerator. No need to room temp them. That soft, creamy center of the egg is a 6-minute egg from a cold egg in the fridge. Eggs are cooking away for 6 minutes, and I'm gonna separate half this soy broth now to marry those peeled eggs in, and then use the other half to start poaching the pork belly. I just warmed this broth enough to dissolve the sugar. I'm gonna be pulling half of it out for the eggs and cooling it. All right, so soy broth is good for eggs. I'm gonna start working on the pork belly. I'm trying to be thoughtful about order of operations. I wanted to get to the raw pork at the end so I don't cross-contaminate. And we're gonna start poaching this in the liquid. You may see pork belly in ramen that's rolled. You can absolutely roll this and tie it and poach it, but I actually like the planks when you see the planks of pork belly. You may know the word char siu from Chinese roast pork. It's the same concept, except this is the Japanese method of braising char siu versus roasting it as they would in Cantonese cuisine. These need to braise for about 2.5 hours. You have 2 choices. They can go stovetop, or you can cover them tightly with foil, put it in like a 325 oven for about 2.5 hours, and you're golden. So we're set up for miso broth, but first I want to spend a second on the eggs. After 6 minutes, these eggs are done, and what I want to do is stop the cooking process as fast as possible, which means an ice bath. So these will go into the ice bath. We'll let those chillax a bit until they are room temp, and then we'll peel them. So here in the center of my board, I've got the broth that we made that the pork belly is simmering in currently. I have peeled the eggs that we've cooked for 6 minutes, and look at how gorgeous these eggs come out when you poke that little hole and you cook it just for 6 minutes. So these are gonna swim right in that soy broth. And what it's really doing at the end of the day is just creating flavor for that egg and making them nice and beautiful, because after they live in that broth for, and I would recommend at least 10 hours, check that out, man. Look at the difference in color. You can't oversteep because you're not cooking anymore. You're just creating a beautiful, what I call a soy ramen egg. We're gonna need the soy eggs in a minute to finish this ramen. For now, let me actually get you into the miso ramen broth. I've got 3 pots on the stove. I just wanna explain what they are. This is the pork belly that's simmering away. I've got a center pot to actually cook the ramen noodles, and this is the little saucepan we're gonna be building our ramen broth in. I'm heating this saucepan up. I'm gonna put just a tiny bit of high temperature oil in there just to saute the pork up. So ramen is supposed to be a rich, luxurious dish. I'm always looking for a fattier ground pork. I like to brown this pork because it builds more layers of flavor. Caramelizing basically pulled all the sugars and those meaty, smoky notes out. So this is going to be the base of our ramen. We've got a lot of things going on in here. So I'm gonna toast up the shiitake mushrooms. This is gonna beef up even more savoriness. I want garlic for that kind of deep earthiness now. I'm gonna take the widest part of my knife, smash that flat. You have to keep in mind, everything that's going into this ramen broth is not gonna be pulled out. So make sure you cut things fine enough to sit in this ramen broth because we are not straining this out at all. So I'm gonna get this all sauteed up. All right, I'm gonna be adding ginger now, and I want the ginger pretty fine, so I'm gonna use my handy box grater plastic tip. Just take some plastic, lay it over the small smooth holes. Don't even bother peeling your ginger. You just wanna grate it right onto the plastic. And this works amazingly because all the fiber ends up here and all my usable ginger pulp is right there. I grab that and marry that in there. I mean, as you can see, I'm building layers of flavor. The mushrooms, the ginger, the garlic, and now the scallions. I mean, I'm only getting so much amazing flavor out of there. So I need scallions for the broth, and I'm gonna want some scallions for garnish. So if there was smell-o-vision, you would be getting roast pork and ginger and garlic and now scallions. Check out the pan with me. The whole idea here was to cook that pork and really start blooming all the flavors in this pan. But I don't want this broth to come to a boil. So I'm gonna reduce my heat and start adding my liquids now. And the base liquid here is going to be chicken stock. You can absolutely make your own chicken stock, but I'm using a box stock. Going for a bit of water. So this is the point we bring in our red miso. When you buy your miso, I really want you to taste the miso on its own because I think it's important to understand what each ingredient brings to the dish. And the best way for me to describe miso flavor, first I would say it tastes like soy sauce because it shares so many ingredients with soy sauce, but I think it has more body to it, right? And it has even a deeper savoriness without having all that salt. You can see how rich this broth is becoming. I'm gonna add some sesame oil for aroma, not too much. And I like the spice of a chili garlic sauce. So with the chili garlic sauce, you can see the connection between cultures with chili garlic sauce, with soy sauce, the ginger, and the noodles. It's a pretty amazing story, kind of similar to sushi because sushi was actually a Chinese way to preserve fish, and then the Japanese took it and made it this amazing phenomenon. This is mirin, which is a sweetened rice wine, which gives you a very kind of nice tone of sweetness. I'm gonna be adding white pepper, salt, and then one more hit of sweetness to balance out all those flavors, just a little bit of sugar. I know it seems like there's a lot of ingredients, but ramen I think is part alchemy, part art, as much as it is, a culinary feat. The last ingredient I'm gonna add is our kombu. I want you to remember this. Boiling is the enemy of kombu, so there's a specific reason I'm putting it in at the end. As the temperature rises, I do want to cook all the ingredients in here, but I don't want to cook the kombu too much because the flavors you're trying to get out of kombu are those outer layers of that kind of dried natural sea salt. You don't want to get down into the green because it starts to taste a little too strong. Let me show you what the kombu looks like and the actual parts of it that I'm trying to extract flavor from. So this is a big kelp leaf, and as you can see, these dry, beautiful, almost sea salt patches on here, that and the outer layer is the flavor I'm trying to extract. Whenever you cook any of my recipes, taste the ingredients by themselves to understand what they add to the dish. I mean, it's like part sea salt and amazing amount of savoriness, and that's what we're going for right here. So I'm just gonna break a bit off, and I'm gonna add the kombu to the broth, and we're just gonna let that simmer. Remember, the enemy of kombu is boiling. So this is gonna simmer for a few minutes. I'm gonna cook my noodles off, and I'm gonna pull this amazing dish together. Ramen bridges two culinary cultures that I'm fascinated with. One I come from, which is the Chinese, and the other I grew up cooking, which was the Japanese. You know, Chinese American kid going to Japanese culinary school and cooking Japanese food. This is the dish that bridges it. You know, I've always been in search of the perfect char siu. And in my Chinese side makes red roasted sweet char siu. The Japanese training has taught me how to make, you know, this perfect ramen char siu. When it comes to making broth, all these ingredients are shared between two cultures. It's very similar to cultural anthropology, right? I'm obsessed with understanding the cultures better through trying to find the best version of the dishes. The miso ramen broth has simmered for about 10 to 20 minutes. I have noodle boiling water going. I want to cut my char siu and get that ready. Look at that. Oh yeah, that's what I'm talking about right there. So with the char siu, you could actually cool it and hold it in the fridge and cut it as you're using it. I'm gonna be using it fresh right out of the pot. And what I'm gonna do now is just slice a few tiles off to prepare it for the bowl. And I'll probably do 3 to 5. So 4 is a bad luck number in China and Japan. I can't help it. I'm sorry. Whenever there's char siu, I need to eat it. Noodle water's going. These are fresh ramen noodles. You can find them at the store. If you're using dry, that's okay too. If you're in a pinch, any egg or wheat noodle is gonna be fine. I'm gonna load an order into my noodle basket. That's gonna go right in. So these noodles will cook for about 2 minutes, and I want them on the al dente side. So we're getting very close to plate up. I wanna set up my bowl and my garnishes. This is your last chance to finalize your ramen broth, so give it a good taste and adjust as you need here. There are all those layers of the herbs, spice, and sweetness, so it's gotta be a very balanced flavor. Noodles are in, we're gonna ladle in the warm broth, and I'm gonna leave the kombu and the mushrooms in the broth. I'm not serving those, but those are gonna continue to give flavor to the broth. Let's lay in the tiles of pork belly. I'm gonna show you that soy egg. And I've actually taken these out of the fridge and let them warm up a little bit. Don't put them in the ramen super cold. So I'm just gonna slide my knife in. That's what I'm talking about. I'm gonna tuck those in. A little bit of bean sprout, scallions, and I like to finish with nori. And just kind of like a little deck of cards, I'm just gonna tuck it right in there. Just a reminder, friends, this recipe is better the next day, meaning the char siu can be cooled, served the next day. The eggs also marinated for the next day. And the longer this broth goes, the better. And you've actually learned 3 recipes in one. The ramen eggs are fantastic for breakfast. The char siu can be for anything for noodles, fried rice, or eaten over white rice. And this broth is just a fantastic base for anything you want to eat with it. Don't be jealous. The crew is so mad right now, you have no idea. So there it is, we have made spicy miso ramen with homemade char siu together. I hope I've inspired you to tackle this dish. As a kid, I spent thousands of days taking the bus to Chinatown and eating dim sum with my grandmother. And later in life, she taught me how to make some of the dishes we'd be eating in the Chinatown dim sum halls. Today, I'm gonna show you how to make a fundamental dish that's ubiquitous with dim sum, Char Siu Bao. It's a Cantonese red roasted pork inside a steam bun, and I'm gonna show you how to make it with a modern day appliance, the air fryer. Hey team, I am Jet Tila, and this is Ready Jet Cook, where I show you how to make my favorite Asian dishes from pantry to plate. And really quick, let's take a second to subscribe. Okay, let's get cooking. So some of the special ingredients to make Char Siu Bao are gonna be hoisin sauce, 5-spice powder, and some red yeast rice powder. We're gonna get there in a second. It is a very fun, cool ingredient. This is actually 2 in 1, because first we're gonna make the Chinese barbecue pork, and then I'm gonna show you how to cut it up, make it a stuffing, and then create the buns and put it all together. All right, so let's start with the barbecue pork marinade. It's a lot of ingredients, but they each have their very specific function. Hoisin sauce being the first one. Now, hoisin is a sweet bean sauce So fermented soybeans, not salty, very sticky, really good for barbecue in general, not just Chinese barbecue. Then 5-spice powder, which is a collection of 5 different spices. But the one that you're gonna probably smell the most is going to be cinnamon. But there's fennel in here, there's pepper in here. It's a very warming spice, and it is a very dominant seasoning in Chinese culture. So the next one is really fun. A lot of the Chinese barbecue pork that you find in restaurants is loaded with food coloring to make it red. Back in the day, OG grandmothers would actually use this. It's a type of rice. It's called red yeast rice. But if you grind that rice down, it creates this gorgeous red color. So this is the natural way to get to that very red Chinese barbecue pork. Moving on down the line now, we've got thin soy sauce. Ketchup, yes, don't at me. Ketchup has a beautiful amount of sweetness, has a nice amount of acidity, and really ties this together quite well. Oyster sauce, we need to get that kind of thickness, glaze, and sweetness, so just some plain old honey works here. And then we want to use a little bit of sherry. We're gonna add a little bit more sugar here. And then the 2 aromatics are gonna be ginger and garlic. And if you've never used a rasp, it is a phenomenal tool. I really don't peel this ginger. All that is pure ginger pulp, no fibers, and I'm gonna tap that right into the bowl. All right, the next 2 cloves of garlic. I like to cut the back end off of the garlic, and that way the cloves separate very easily. The knife will help loosen these cloves up. But I want them on the whole side so I can run them along the rasp. So pure garlic pulp right there. So that's it, that's the marinade. You see how that red yeast rice powder is activating once it hydrates? Look at that red color. It's pretty stunning, I gotta say. Marinade is done, but before I swim my pork shoulder in here, I'm gonna separate a 1/4 cup, and I'm gonna add honey to that later to create a glaze for the actual cooking. So we're gonna actually be basting with this beautiful glaze. There it is, all right. This is probably one of the most prized pieces of pork there is. It is the shoulder. So I wanna create enough surface area so each side of this pork gets that love from the marinade. So this pork is pretty well submerged. Now we're gonna go in the fridge for a few hours overnight. Longer the better on this one. I have one done, and I'm gonna pull that out so we can get cooking. So I do want to take a second and talk about the air fryer. In China, they actually use forced air ovens, so a lot of heat and a lot of air, and that's why the air fryer is perfect. I really like cooking in these sheet pans that have an elevated rack because I do want air to get all the way around this. You're gonna get a really beautiful roast and those charred ends that get really crispy. You absolutely want to remove some of the marinade off this pork because there's a lot of sugar in here, and as we know, sugar tends to burn. So I'm just taking 1 or 2 sheets of paper towels, using tongs, so I'm not touching the pork, and just gently dabbing off a majority of that marinade. I've set the air fryer to 350 degrees on air fryer, which all that means is it's running a huge fan inside, and that's gonna create that convection or forced air oven that's gonna char those edges and not dry out this pork as it cooks. All right, so this pork is ready to go. So we've been cooking the pork for about 15 minutes, and as you can see, it's starting to get nice and kind of caramely on the outside. Here's one more step to build even more flavor. We're gonna make a glaze. This is the reserved 1/4 cup of the original marinade with all those kind of sweet and savory flavors in there, and we're gonna reinforce that with a good amount of honey. It's actually gonna lock in the moisture of all the juices inside the pork. It's gonna make it super tender and moist on the inside. I'm starting to get a nice caramelization on the top side. I'm gonna take this glaze and just lock in all that flavor. And all that sugar on the exterior is going to get into that hot oven and further caramelize and get a little bit crispy. I'm basting once. If you fall in love with this glaze and want to do it 2 or 3 times, I'm not gonna be mad at you. This is also the glaze that you can hold your pork in after the cook so it doesn't dry out. All right, so we're going back in for about 5 or 10 more minutes or 165 degrees internal temperature. So while the pork finishes cooking, I'm gonna pull all the bun ingredients and show you how to make the bao dough. So this is that bun at the dim sum restaurant. That's that white fluffy bun, sometimes filled, sometimes not. In the mixing bowl, I'm gonna start with a little bit of cake flour, and I'm using cake flour because I want a very light, fluffy dough. I'm gonna put the sugar in there. This is baking powder, not baking soda. And then I'm using instant dry yeast, so I can mix it in dry and very slowly. I just wanna kind of aerate and combine all of these dries. All right, so I've got half a cup of water. I'm gonna start my mixer and just slowly add my water in. I like to stop the mixer and then kind of get that dry bits of flour. So eventually, all of the dries are gonna grab on to the water, hydrate, and then form into one nice dough. You can start to see it pulling together. All right, so the dough ball has pulled together. All of that motion has created a nice amount of gluten. All that's gonna translate into nice puffy dough. So here is where my grandmother would have added a nice tablespoon of lard. Lard's the fat that comes from pigs that is firm at room temperature. If you don't wanna use it, or if you're not really excited about using lard, some vegetable shortening is gonna be great, but you do wanna add that fat in here. So I'm literally just kind of scraping it and pushing it onto the dough on the bottom of the hook, and it's gonna work together beautifully. This is gonna give the dough real beautiful richness. All right, that's looking good. It's super smooth. It looks nice and puffy, and I think it's time to pull our pork. Let's see. Oh yeah, look at that. I mean, come on. That's it right there. Perfect Chinese barbecue pork by itself. This is done. Slice it up, eat it over rice, eat it in noodles. It is the perfect ingredient. All right, so this dough ball is done. We're gonna need to let it rest now. So I have a clean bowl. I'm gonna lightly oil this bowl. I'm using pan spray, but just a little bit of vegetable oil is gonna work great. So what we need to do now is allow this dough ball to rest from all that kneading, and the yeast is gonna help it double in size. And then we're gonna be making our filling to complete our buns. All right, so we're just gonna cover this with a little wrap. Let this rest for about 90 minutes. Okay, so these vegetables are actually gonna become almost like a stock, like a very strong liquid base that's gonna encapsulate all the cut pork. It's a very cool technique. So I've started a saute pan on high. I'm gonna pour a little bit of oil until it coats the bottom, and we're gonna saute these veg up. So I'm not really looking for any specific cut. I just want them kind of even dices. So I'm doing probably about a 3/4 inch dice. So, and I kind of like to cook as I go, meaning I'm cutting onions first because that goes into the pan first. And what we're doing is actually pulling the flavor out of all these ingredients because we're actually gonna fish them out. So we're gonna cook all the essential oils out of them to kind of season our filling. So I've got a green bell, a red bell, and I only need half. And I'm not too worried about size. Medium dice is gonna work here. So I've got a really nice bunch of scallions. This practice of using very hot oil to extract the essential oils of all of these aromatics is a very old technique that we're gonna use here to make this filling. So we're really gonna cook that down as we pull out our other ingredients now. I'm cooking this on full blast because I really wanna break these down, and as they break down, they're gonna bring their flavors into this stock. All right, so next I'm gonna add sugar and our seasonings. So we've got light soy sauce here. We've got oyster sauce, and I've got some dark soy or black soy. Really get in there and allow this all to come to a nice boil. That boiling is gonna continue to break down these vegetables. It really cooks a lot like a stir fry, so nothing too complicated here. It smells incredible in here. And now I'm gonna add water, so we're pulling out the flavor of the vegetable. Again, we're building this very incredible, rich stock. The vegetables have done their job, and it's time to get them out of there now. I know, you're like, you're just throwing away these veggies, bro. Like, what's the deal? They've given us all they can in terms of flavor, and that liquid now is gonna bind with the pork. We're gonna thicken it up, and that's gonna be our char siu filling. It's time to turn this liquid into a paste. I've got water, and into this water, I'm adding a combination of potato starch and cornstarch. We're not just gonna thicken, we're gonna take this down almost to a gum, like a paste. My liquid is at a simmer. I'm gonna add my slurry in, and you're gonna see this go from a liquid to a sauce, then reduce down into a paste very quickly. Look at that, almost like a gel. And the reason why we want this pork inside this thicker gel casing is because, remember, we're gonna put all this pork into a bread, into a bao. We don't want it kind of steaming out and diluting that dough. I'm gonna switch over to a spoon. So I'm gonna cook this down until it almost can't run off the spoon. So what I'm looking for is, you see how that's running? I'm still gonna cook a little more water out of this until it's a stable gel and it doesn't pull off the spoon. All right, let's cut some pork. Usually fresh char siu is for the plate to eat. This could be like second day char siu, but you're getting the good stuff right there. Look at that cook. That is perfect. 165. The red color of that yeast rice has permeated. Wait, sorry, I got to. I'm more. This is the best Scooby snacks right here, I gotta say. That sweetness and the umami, the depth of flavor on barbecue pork is so outstanding. I'm gonna quarter turn now, and now cut it into small dice. So here we go. So let's continue cooking this. And that's it, team. This is going to tighten up into a very tight gel filling, and then we're gonna let that cool, and we're gonna finish our bao buns. All right, so the dough has been resting. It has doubled in size. My finger leaves an impression. That's exactly what I want. I'm gonna use a little bit of bench flour and then actually get the dough out. So what I'm trying to do is create a rectangular sheet. So I'm just gonna roll out from the middle. What we're going for is a 1/2 inch thick, square it off. Now what I'm gonna do is grab the sides. We're actually gonna now almost kind of laminate it. We're gonna create layers inside the dough by just rolling it up. And now I'm gonna cut this into 6 equal pieces. So if I start from the middle, I'll go 3, and we'll go 3 here. So I've created all the layers. I'm actually gonna press down this way, kind of top to bottom. And if you look really tight, you can start to see these little layers. And once it steams, they're gonna kind of open up and get vertical. That's the beauty of this technique. So it's time to roll these out. So I'm gonna take about 2 to 3 tablespoons of filling to put into the middle. There's a few ways you could do this, but I think the easiest way to begin is what I kind of call the tulip fold. So I'm gonna bring 2 sides together and create 3 sections here, all right? 3 very distinct sections, just like that. And then I'm going to pinch those off to seal them very tightly. I don't want anything coming out of this bao. So with the 3 sections, I'm gonna pull those corners, join them in the middle, now capturing it in my hand so I can start shaping. And you see these seams that I've created, the 3 seams? Push those seams together now, and that's it. I like the tulip fold a lot. So it's really important that you get a full rolling boil on your steamer. A variety of steamers can work. I just have the normal kind of 10-inch steamer basket. I've got about 3 inches of water, and as you can see, it is at a very aggressive steam. And that's important because you want to get that flour spring. This has to kind of heat up really quick to like 200 degrees and get that initial push, and that's going to activate that yeast. So all my baos are ready to go. Get them right in, close it tight to encapsulate that steam. So I'm gonna push the lid down, making sure I have a good seal. And don't peek. Resist the urge for at least 5 to 6 minutes. We're gonna do an 8-minute full steam, and we're gonna come back, and we're gonna see these poofy, perfect char siu bao. Okay, so it's been 8 minutes. I'm gonna be brave and check my steamer, hoping for puffy bows. Oh, yes. Where's the angel music when I need it, guys? You know you've done your job when those tulip folds actually open up. That's perfect, nice and pillowy. This is full steam, so carefully pulling these out onto a plate. I'm gonna let these cool down because they are quite hot. The smell is of almost like cotton candy, yeasty like sourdough. All right, so let's crack one open. That's it right there. Beautifully cakey on the outside, that Chinese barbecue pork on the inside. There's something really satisfying about cracking a recipe that you've eaten since you were a child, like with your grandmother, and figuring it out and making it. She's watching and she'd be super proud of me today. This is fun. It's a very nostalgic dish and it takes me right back to my childhood. The dough, tighter than a cake, but not quite, you know, spongy. The filling is salty, it's sweet, it's got all those flavors of 5 spice. It is absolutely an amazing accomplishment to be making Char Siu Bao at home. Guys, I hope you had fun making this with me. If you enjoyed yourself, hit that like button below. Post any comments or questions you have, we will get to them. Thanks so much for hanging out today on Ready, Jet, Cook. We'll see you later.